Friends, you are on Ruslan Bailov's channel, and this is our daily summary of the course of combat operations in the Ukrainian direction. Well then, the meeting between Putin, Witkov and Kushner has concluded. The negotiations, which, by the way, lasted almost 5 hours, ended with a quite predictable result. As Ushakov reported, the parties were unable to reach any compromise solutions. Despite the fact that the Ukrainian side presented 4 new peace initiatives at once, none of them suits Russia. The reasons are obvious. The AFU is not ready to withdraw troops from occupied areas, they do not wish to formalize their refusal to join NATO, and they do not fulfill other key conditions, precisely those for which everything began. So not a single proposed option was accepted, which means combat operations continue, and we continue to analyze the situation on the front line. Over the past day, Russian troops were able to advance on several directions at once, and quite successfully. While Zelensky broadcasts fairy tales about how Russia allegedly has no successes, his armed forces are losing new settlements and territories daily. Let's start with the Seversk direction. Just yesterday, we discussed how realistic it was to take Seversk by the end of the year and came to the conclusion that the key point is the village of Sviatopokrovskoye. The last road through which the AFU garrison in the city is supplied runs through it. And what do we see now? Russian fighters over the past day crossed the Bakhmutka River, entered Sviatopokrovskoye and penetrated deep inside the settlement. Footage of battles from there appeared on the internet yesterday. What's next? As I showed you earlier, the heights dominate there, and the question with them has not yet been resolved. Therefore, it's difficult to say whether Russian units will be able to establish themselves there reliably. If the heights are taken, then there will be no doubt. But in any case, the trend in the Seversk direction is clearly positive, and the chances of taking the city have increased significantly, moving south to the Zaporizhzhia region. Here, too, a very serious breakthrough occurred. Essentially, the AFU defense, which for a long time held back the Russian offensive near the urban-type settlement of Stepnohirsk, could not withstand it and essentially collapsed. The map here speaks more eloquently than words. What happened? Russian troops managed to encircle the remnants of the Ukrainian garrison in the elevated part of the settlement. History repeats itself. The AFU command is making the same mistakes again. Was there a chance to retreat north and avoid encirclement? Of course there was. But that would look like a betrayal, because then the Russians would have occupied the settlement without a fight. As a result, they stayed, and several days ago Russian troops closed the pincers around Stepnohirsk, entering from the west and east. Yesterday this pocket was finally closed. Several dozen Ukrainian military personnel, approximately 2 to 3 platoons, that is, around 50-60 people, found themselves completely blocked without possibility of escape. This isn't the scale of Mirnograd, of course, but Stepnohirsk is not Mirnograd either. The losses for the AFU here are significant. But that's not all. South and southeast of Stepnohirsk, Russian troops advanced almost 4 kilometers. For this section of the front, this is not just a good result, but truly incredible. I can say more. In one day, more territory was taken here than in the entire month of November. This is what the front looks like when the defense is cracking at the seams. The offensive is moving in the direction of Lukyanovsky, and from current positions to this village only 2 kilometers remain. A wide front is forming from Primorskoye to Lukyanovsky. And then, what? As soon as Stepnohirsk is finally finished off, the offensive will go north toward Veselyanka. And reaching the Veselyanka-Grigorovka line essentially opens a direct direction to Zaporizhzhia. From this line to the city remains only about 10 kilometers. Imagine, as soon as the front stabilizes along this line, the situation will become completely different. I cannot accurately predict the timeframes, but if the war continues for another 2 to 3 months, and judging by the results of the negotiations, that's exactly what will happen. Russian troops will most likely reach Veselyanka and possibly break through the last line of defense there, covering Zaporizhzhia from the south. Moving on. News is coming not only from this sector of the Zaporizhzhia region. On the Huliaipole direction, the AFU defense also continues to crumble. Over the past day, a most important event occurred. Units of the East grouping occupied the village of Dobropol. not to be confused with the city of the same name in Donetsk region. This is a small village on the bank of the Huliaipole, where approximately 500 people lived before the war. Battles for it lasted not long, only 4 days, after which Ukrainian forces were forced to withdraw. Yesterday, fighters showed footage of objective control with flags in the center of the settlement. Why is this important? First, Russian units reached the Huliaipole along a sufficiently wide front. This is precisely where the recently built Ukrainian defense line runs, and to advance further west, toward Orikhiv, it will have to be broken through. Second, the front has approached the northern outskirts of Huliaipole, which are essentially unprotected. All that remains is to take Vavirovka, and it will be possible to enter the city from the north, which will sharply accelerate the advance. Vavirovka is comparable in size to Dobropol, so it can be assumed that battles for it will take approximately 5 to 7 days. That is, approximately by December 10th, Russian forces will most likely take this village and enter Huliaipole from the north. In addition to this, there was progress east of the city. Fighters took control of the village of Zeleny High. Previously, unofficial information appeared that the village was occupied, but confirmation came only yesterday, along with footage of objective control. Now what remains is to finish off Chervone, although, according to my data, there are no longer Ukrainian troops there. So possibly even today, we will see footage from there as well. In Huliaipole itself, battles continue, and so far there are no fresh updates from there. Continuing. In another large city, fierce battles are ongoing, and Russian units there are also demonstrating noticeable progress. We're talking about Kostiantynivka. Although in the media space attention is mainly concentrated on Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, Huliaipole and Mirnograd, essentially everyone has forgotten about this city. Meanwhile, Russian troops have already managed to capture the entire southern part of the eastern sector of Kostiantynivka. If you look at the map, the city is divided by a railway line into 2 parts. So, the southern fragment of this eastern zone has essentially already been lost by the AFU. Over the past day, assault groups cleared and took control of 11 streets and over 100 houses. Currently, forward forces have established themselves along Stroitelnaya Street, but available data indicates that units are already advancing further, and clashes are occurring even beyond the Sobonosti Street line. I'll clarify right away. This does not mean that the Ukrainian defense is about to collapse entirely, and that Russian troops will take the city in the near future. Yesterday I already noted and will repeat. Kostiantynivka is a large metropolis, the largest settlement for which the Russian army has been conducting assault operations since the summer of 2022. To expect a rapid fall of the city would be absolutely unrealistic. However, the very fact of advancement is indisputable, and this is obvious. Meanwhile, Ukrainian media, as well as specialized experts, prefer to remain silent and create the impression as if the situation remained stable. But this is not so. More than 10% of Kostiantynivka has already come under RF control. On this, we'll conclude the review of the situation on the line of combat contact and switch to what's happening in the political sphere. In the information field, news appeared that Yermak threw a half-hour tantrum for Zelensky. Until the last moment, he did not believe that the president would actually decide to remove him from his position. According to a source close to his circle, what shocked him most was precisely the feeling of personal betrayal. Moreover, it is reported that Yermak has been blocked from leaving Ukraine. Criminal cases are being prepared against him. Border guards received direct instructions not to allow the former head of the president's office beyond the country's borders. Kiev media and Rada deputies claim that NABU detectives are already forming 3 suspicions. Our source in the Kiev office reports that NABU has voice recordings of Zelensky within the framework of negotiations regarding Mindich's schemes, as well as audio recordings of Yermak's conversations with law enforcement structures, where he touches on a number of high-profile topics. These materials, according to the resident Telegram channel, are now being used as the main instrument of pressure on Zelensky in negotiations with Trump's team within the framework of the peace process. Yermak has a huge list of enemies, and the situation around him is rapidly escalating. As they write in the legitimate channel, his wings have already been clipped. The question is only whether they will continue to persecute him. Some even joke that he wouldn't hurt to publish a statement in advance that he does not intend to commit suicide. Who knows, former allies might send negotiators in gloves. Interesting news in the military sphere. Russian geraniums are now also being used as air interception means. A mirror response to the enemy's actions has been created. Since Ukrainian forces began intercepting UAVs using surface-to-air missiles, the idea of equipping strike drones with air-to-air missiles was finally implemented by the Russian armed forces. As a result, attempts at aerial interception of Russian UAVs, including geraniums, by the same F-16s, will now be significantly more difficult. Now about Ukraine's domestic politics and the West's position. Rada deputies have felt that the regime has stalled, and they intend to increase pressure on Zelensky in all directions. In the coming days, according to sources, sabotage from the elites, primarily large business groups, will manifest itself more noticeably. The opposition again intends to block the parliamentary tribune. Deputy Zhelezniak, who was present at the Conciliation Council, reported this. The European Solidarity and Tymoshenko's Batkivshchina factions demand a radical reboot of the government and a meeting with Zelensky on the international agenda. Zhelezniak believes that other groups, including part of the ruling party's deputies, will soon join these demands. Moreover, according to him, not a single faction, except servants of the people, is ready to support the draft budget for next year, and even within the mono-majority party itself, there are only about 120 votes out of the necessary 226. Now about finances and the situation in the EU. Kiev's partners are essentially leaving Ukraine without support at the decisive moment of the war, but in Bankova they prefer to ignore obvious realities. First, the Belgian Prime Minister openly stated that he would not allow the use of frozen Russian assets, and then European structures refused to provide financial guarantees. The ECB rejected the idea of issuing Ukraine a so-called reparations loan of 140 billion euros. The Financial Times reported that the central bank considered the European Commission's initiative to exceed the regulator's resources and powers. Politico reported that European countries refused Belgium's demand to provide essentially a blank security guarantee in case of a possible lawsuit from Russia. The Belgian Prime Minister demanded from EU countries financial guarantees that would exceed 140 billion euros, and with the possibility of paying this amount in just a few days. Moreover, he wanted these guarantees to extend to the period after the end of EU sanctions against Russia. 4 European diplomats told Politico that this would make their countries' economies dependent on court decisions and could turn into obligations for billions of euros years after the end of the conflict. One diplomat directly asked, if the guarantees are unlimited and indefinite, then what are we even getting ourselves into? The refusal of a number of EU countries could block negotiations on the loan before the key meeting in mid-December. If an agreement is not reached, the most likely alternative will be the issuance of additional EU debt obligations to cover Ukraine's budget deficit. Now a bit of analysis. According to our data, Zelensky never received personal security guarantees from the USA. He fears that ultimately Washington may refuse to support him. The source claims that inside the president's office they are convinced. The American administration and Moscow will sooner or later reach an agreement, and Zelensky himself will find himself in a position where pressure will begin to be applied to him. This is what legitimate reports. There are also rumors spreading that the Servants of the People faction is preparing to collapse. This would become a symbol of the sunset of the Zelensky era. Earlier, we already reported that NABU has cases on almost every second deputy, and many parliamentarians have long been cooperating with investigators. As sources claim, deputies have long wanted to leave because they don't want to become scapegoats. Now they are trying to keep them at least until February 2026, so they have time to ratify Trump's plan, and only then could they resign their powers. But not everyone agrees to wait. If deputies begin to leave en masse, the globalists will disrupt the implementation of Trump's peace plan. The US president himself recently stated that a significant part of American aid to Kyiv was issued in cash. He emphasized that US financial participation in the war is ending. Biden, according to Trump, handed out money like candy. We're talking about an amount of around $350 billion, most of which was issued in cash, and the rest was transferred in the form of military property. Now European countries are purchasing American weapons at full cost in order to then transfer them to Ukraine. We're monitoring the situation. Thank you, friends, for being with me. Subscribe to the channel. Peace and goodness to all.